Greetings and welcome to Writers on Writing. I'm your host, Dr. Brenda Greene, and Writers on Writing comes to you from the studio of Medgar Evers College. This radio show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. We interview writers from different parts of the African diaspora, talking about their work, their craft, and their lives. And I am also founder and executive director of the Center for Black Literature and director of the National Black Writers Conference. So I'm very, very pleased to have with me in the studio today a writer who has written a novel that's really, I would say speculative, part of the genre of speculative fiction, but it's an excellent story that draws on the presence of Africa and speculative fiction. So I'd like to welcome Anita Kopacz. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you. And I'd like to begin by having you describe more of yourself. I mean, your bio is very limiting, I think, because you are an award-winning writer and spiritual advisor, the former editor-in-chief of Heart and Soul magazine, and managing editor of Beauty Sense magazine. And when you're not writing, you can find Anita on the dance floor or traveling the world with her children. So tell us a little bit more about who Anita is, because the whole idea of being a spiritual advisor really connects so well with your new book, Shallow Waters.
Yes. So yes, let me see. So as far as being a spiritual advisor, right now with that, I do retreats around the world, and I love to create spaces. It is open to everyone, but for me, I love to create safe spaces for Black women to heal, do yoga, eat healthy food, and connect to their spirituality. And so that's what I do mostly with the it's really spiritual psychology. I have a master's in spiritual psychology. I don't do private clients anymore, but it definitely informs a lot of my writing. And when I was at Heart and Soul magazine, it informed a lot of the articles that we put out, and just overall health and wellness for Black women is one of my main passions. I actually have my sweatshirt on. It's Zero F's Given. So Zero F's Given is my nonprofit, and it's basically a day of sexual abstinence in order to honor people who have experienced any form of sexual violence. And, when I was going through my healing journey, I was molested when I was 7 years old. And when I was going through my healing journey, I was surrounded by a lot of white people in the classes, in the workshops, in the retreats. And so I was just like, well, where are we going? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so that's what I'm creating.
Right. So is that how you would define being a spiritual psychologist, or how would you define that?
So a spiritual psychologist is just like a regular psychologist, but you add in spirituality. And so it's the healed person within spiritual psychology is very simple. It's someone who can love and be loved. So it sounds easy, but when we think about it, sometimes we run away from being loved or run away from receiving, right? And so the healed person in spiritual psychology is that someone who can love and be loved. So if there's any blocks towards that, that's what we work on and talk about and clear.
Okay, so you also draw very much on African spirituality and Native American, but particularly in this novel, more so on the African spirituality and the Yoruba gods and religion and motifs. Tell us about your background in that area and what motivated you to use this this type of spirituality in your novel?
Yes. So I have been very connected to the Ifa religion and the Yoruba, from the Yoruba, for quite some time, probably over 20 years now. And but I never knew why I was so drawn towards it, right? Like I didn't know why I was so drawn. I don't practice the religion, but I feel very drawn towards it. I have so much respect towards it. And, like there's a deep love, I would say, and also a deep love for our history, because it is a part of our history, or so many of our histories. And so I didn't consciously know what the connection was, but while I was writing, or while I was sharing about the novel, African Ancestry actually got a hold of me, and they're like, "We'd love to do your DNA." I was like, "Oh yeah." And so then they asked if they could, share the results, online, as basically film it and share the results. And it turns out that I am Yoruba.
Wow.
Or and so it was definitely a very emotional moment, because it all of a sudden made so much sense, right? Like why I felt so drawn. I mean, drawn enough to write a whole novel about it, right? And then to me, it's the weaving back and the returning to who we really are and where we came from.
Okay. So
Yeah.
just give our audience a brief synopsis of the novel without giving all of it.
Okay. So Shallow Waters is about Yemeya. Yemeya is an Orisha, which is like a god or goddess in the pantheon of gods in Yoruba religion. The Yoruba people, Ifa religion in Nigeria. And Yemeya is a black mermaid. In the lore, she was said to have watched over our ancestors as they went over the Middle Passage and protected the souls of the ones that jumped off, and the millions of people that were either thrown overboard or jumped off. And so what I did was I imagined Yemeya in a coming of age story. And it starts off like every other mermaid story. She falls in love with a fisherman. But in this one, it's in the 1800s, starts off on the west coast of Africa. And she falls in love with a fisherman named Obatala. And then he is taken by the slave ships over to the New World, and she has to cocoon for 40 days and 40 nights. And during that time, she cocoons to turn into a human, and during that time, she loses him. So the whole book is about her trying to find her love in a place where her skin color makes her a slave.
Yes, it's really really interesting story, and how you have the Black mermaid, but you also interweave so many historical moments in the novel, the whole theme of the transatlantic slave trade.
Yes.
You've touched on that, and then of course when we get to the Americas, what it is like to live as the enslaved person, to be trapped in that. Do you want to speak to that, some of the themes that you found important to include
Yes.
in this novel?
Yes, absolutely. So a major part of the book for me was including historical figures and some of the things that they did. Um, and and it's really interesting, because when I was doing a lot of the research, it was great because almost everyone had different names than what the names that they're famous for. So I was able to just put them in without actually like spelling out who this person was.
Mhm.
And so in the beginning of the book, there is a timeline that shows when all of the things actually happened. And so we do speak to the transatlantic slave trade. We speak to the Underground Railroad. We speak to a lot of the Quakers that actually helped, and Harriet Tubman. I don't want to give away anything really, but
No, that's
there-
right.
there's awesome parts to this story. And what was really funny about, not funny, but to me just powerful, when I was writing the book, and I know a lot of people say that, we feel like our characters come to us and, give us the story. And while I was writing one night, I was still at Heart and Soul, but I was writing the book at night. And I had this part where I wrote in the book that Harriet Tubman was an herbalist, and she gave a young 2-year-old a tincture so that he could fall asleep while they're on the Underground Railroad, so that, obviously so that they wouldn't get caught. So then when I woke up in the morning, I was like, oh, I think I want to take that part out, because I don't know if Harriet Tubman was an herbalist. And, I didn't want to put things that were untrue, even though it was fiction. And so I go to a sales meeting in the city for Heart and Soul. It was at this restaurant. So there were people who weren't a part of the sales meeting that were at the restaurant as well. So when I was done with the sales meeting, this one woman just walks up to me and she's like, "Did you know that Harriet Tubman was an herbalist?"
Oh my goodness.
She didn't say hi. She didn't just said that. And I was like, wow. And so then I was curious. I was like, why did you say that to me just now? And she was like, well, I don't know, because it's Black History Month and she was Black. So it wasn't weird that she said that.
If she came up to you.
She came up to me and she's like, it's Black History Month. And I was like, I feel like this woman would like to know. She was like, I just read it and I felt like this woman would like to know. And I'm like, okay, all right, Mama Harriet, I'm not going to take that part out, So it did feel like I was supported really by the universe while I was writing it.
Right. That gets to talking about your writing process. What is that like for you? A typical day or the process you go through? How long you worked on this project, on this book?
Yes. So my writing process it's so interesting because for the novel I'm writing right now, I got to go to a residency. It was supposed to be for a month, but I have young children at home, so I ended up going for a week. So I had a whole week of uninterrupted time, which was the first time ever that I've ever written like that. And so usually my writing process was whenever I can get time, sit down and write, right?
Even with people around you. You can
so I ended up having to do it with my kids around. And because I felt like I will never finish this if I only do it at night. And then I end up falling asleep while I'm writing if I do it at night. And so the process of writing Shallow Waters, there was definitely a lot of chaos around because, I have 3 kids, they were running around and, and I figured out a way to do it. I don't even know if I could do it like that anymore, but luckily they're a little bit older. And, but I don't, for Shallow Waters, I didn't have an outline. It just kind of flowed through me. And I would say that to me, it felt like Yemeya was telling me the story. It felt very much like that.
way. Okay.
Yes. And with this next one that I'm writing, I do have an outline. So it's a different process. And but still that feeling of, I do feel like I have to connect with the characters and really drop in and see how they would feel. And so there's that process of connecting. And just thinking of the process, I like to have music on that has no lyrics. Whenever there's lyrics, it just messes with my brain while I'm trying to write. And but it is pretty much like I'm writing whenever I can. So I'll write when my kids are at school. And perhaps maybe I'll be able to do another week somewhere for writing, but it all depends on if I can leave the kids.
So it's, when I think about the fact that your writing is also very spiritual, are you guided by dreams? Do you dream often? Yes.
Absolutely. I love that question. I just got chills. Yes, I do. I do dream, and especially with shallow waters.
Or remember your dreams, I should say, because we all dream.
Yes, yes. I do remember them most of the time. But one of the dreams I had for this one in particular was I had a dream about Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Yes,
And
who's in your
yeah,
book.
yes. And then when I woke up from the dream, randomly, someone had sent me a quote from him. And I was just like, okay, let me see how old he was during this time, because perhaps he's asking to be in the story. And it was like all perfect timing and where he would have been, in the United States during that time. So I feel like, yes, definitely, dreams do come through in this, and before I write, I do meditate to connect to the energies, so that I can really be as authentic as I can with the characters. And I do have someone who is Yoruba, who I check in with to make sure that it is true to the people.
Right. Now you've shared a couple of highlights, what I would call highlights in writing this novel. Do you have any other highlights that you can share? What have been highlights for you?
Yes,
Think
one of the main highlights. So while I've done so many things, like you know, being a psychologist and a mom and editor-in-chief of Heart and Soul, this book really felt like, it was my heart project. It felt like I did what I came here to do, right? Like one of those strong projects.
Mhm.
And while I was writing it, my kids saw the whole process. So they saw me writing, they saw me like making intentions and saying it's going to be published. And, and eventually I was like, am I crazy? I was like, is this really going to happen? I'd have moments like that of feeling insecure. Like, I actually don't know if it's going to get published. And so my favorite part was seeing my kids' reaction when I did get my book deal. And so it all it like came together for them and for me, right? Like they've seen me working on it and putting so much energy in it, and speaking life into it. And then another highlight was seeing my daughter, same as you. Almost same as you. She finished it in like less than 24 hours. She could not put it down. And I was like, so it kind of like spoke for itself, right? Like I wanted to be like, what do you think? And like, and ask her to stop reading so I can talk to her about it. And she just finished it and was like, just loved it. So to me, that was a real highlight.
Okay. You've mentioned your children several times during this interview. Let's have their names and their ages.
Yes. Okay. So I have Sadie, who is 18 now. She's at NYU. And then I have Tila, who is 16, and Mayan, who is 14. So they are in high school now.
Perfect. Every 2 years, huh?
Every 2 years, yes. Every 2 years. It was really like year and a half.
Oh my goodness. So
yeah, it was intense in the beginning.
well, but it's wonderful now, I'm sure. So just you talked about the highlights. What about challenges can you share with us any challenges in
Yes.
drafting this?
Yeah. So I like to keep in the full timeline of how long this book took me to write, because I was doing a lot of other things in life during this time. And so from the idea to publishing it was 7 years. And 2 of those years were I had a complete writer's block. I couldn't even, it might even be 3 of those years. I would open my computer and feel nauseous, like I just couldn't write. And what I realized when I was finishing it was that I had to grow as a person to know what came next in the
What
story.
the timing was it? Yes.
Exactly. And with it, because I wasn't on a time schedule, and I wasn't working with a publisher while I was writing, I was able to take that time to, I did a lot of research. I did, I grew as a person, and so it was challenging, really. The writer's block was challenging, and I had spoken to a literary agent, and he was just like, if you feel writer's block, just close your computer and do something else. Don't try to like fight through it, because it's just going to be frustrating and you won't like what comes out of it.
Or if you do,
Something,
you're not going to, as you said, you're not going to like it, or you're going to go back and say the timing wasn't right.
yeah. And do something that brings you inspiration, because our best writing is when is inspired writing.
Right. So transferring over that line, who inspires you? I always think of writers and conversations with other writers and artists. So who are you in conversation with, and who inspires you?
That's a great question. So, um, wow, my mind right now is, so Octavia Butler has been probably my favorite. um, she's been my favorite. I remember when I read Wild Seed in college, and I was just blown away that there was a story like this that included African characters. And that just, I loved it. Then I read Kindred, and I was like, what? Like, it just, like, she blew my mind for sure. And but I would say she is the one who I'm most inspired by.
And
Yeah.
why speculative fiction as the genre? Is that going to be your, just as a follow-up, is that going to be your new novel? Is that also speculative fiction?
Yes, it is. It is. I feel like it's very interesting, because I feel like a lot of African spirituality, or just spirituality, can be mixed with, magic and things that seem science fiction. And especially if we're showing how it is manifesting in the world. And so while some of those things to me, like just even someone saying Harriet Tubman was an herbalist, right? It shows up in my life as reality. But I guess when I'm writing it, it is speculative fiction, right? And so I feel like it's probably the most appropriate genre for it to be in. I know it's also historical fiction. So the second book will be as well.
Right. So it sounds as if you're saying that speculative fiction isn't always necessarily speculative, because you're writing about stories, and then when you bring in these elements to and use your creativity to tell the story and to really get the message across, you use the techniques that are coming out of speculative fiction.
Yes.
Yes. So as we come to a close, we have a number of writers who listen to us. What is your message for emerging writers? Well, and what would you tell our student writers?
Keep going and believe in yourself, believe in your vision. When you have that vision in your heart, you're the one that was given that vision. Not so many people might be blind to it, and it doesn't matter what their opinion is. If they are blind to it, they were not given the vision. So keep going, believe in yourself, and have faith in your vision.
Right. Okay. I really want to thank you. You know, as I was reading this, I could imagine also this being a film. Have you thought about that? Have you thought
I've
about
thought
that?
about it, from your lips to God's ears.
Okay.
So we shall see. Yes, we've started the process, and it does. I do have a what is it called? A shopping agreement. So let's
Oh,
hope that
that's
it works.
wonderful. So
Yeah,
that's wonderful. Yeah,
yeah,
this is definitely the time when you look at what's happening
yeah.
in Black speculative fiction, particularly. The timing is perfect. And as
Yes.
I said, this is a type of book that I think would attract a range of audiences. It's
Mm,
for the general, the general public, but it's also it's not horror, it's a combination of the fantasy and the fairy tale and the love story. You have
exactly.
all that the elements of good storytelling.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
so let's share with our audience how they can support you by purchasing the book.
Yes, I would love for people to, if you can, get it from an independent Black-owned bookstore. The one that I do love is Bingham Books and Culture.
Spell
And
that, please.
so Bingham is Bingham, and then Books and Culture. And if you can't find it there, you can always go to Amazon. They have it. And Target and Barnes and Noble, just basically wherever books are sold. But I do love to patronize Black bookstores.
Well, thank you. Thank you for writing that story. Thank you for showing us other worlds.
Thank
And
you.
thank you also for participating in the National Black Writers Conference. It's one of our special speakers.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Remember, the writer is always reading, the reader is always writing. Keep reading and writing. Empower yourselves as readers and writers. And write me at info@mec.cuny.edu. Let us know what you're thinking. And visit our website, www.centerforblackLiterature.org. Sign up for our email list, and you will see all of the wonderful ways that we are realizing our mission of supporting Black writers throughout the African diaspora and supporting Black literature. Thank you for tuning in.